Emma Caldwell stood at the pinnacle of her career. As the CEO of Vanguard Industries, her name was synonymous with innovation, power, and precision. A true trailblazer in the tech world, Emma's public image was one of impenetrable strength. Reporters loved to describe her as an iron fist in a velvet glove, a leader capable of inspiring fierce loyalty in her employees while simultaneously commanding respect, even fear, from her rivals. Her success had brought her wealth and influence beyond her wildest dreams. Her home, a sleek glass and steel masterpiece perched on a hill overlooking the city, symbolized her ambition. Her marriage to Matthew Caldwell, a novelist with a reputation for poignant, emotionally resonant stories, was considered a perfect balance of intellect and affection. Their marriage, celebrated in glossy magazine spreads, was portrayed as the union of two brilliant minds, one practical, one creative, complementing one another in ways most couples could only envy. So most of the past 30 years between the two marriages had been one ennui, kinetic accountants. But behind the glamorous facade, Emma harbored doubts she rarely allowed herself to acknowledge. Tonight, Vanguard's annual gala was in full swing. The ballroom of the Grand Regent Hotel shimmered with light, the crystal chandeliers casting a golden glow over the impeccably dressed crowd. The gala was more than just a celebration. It was a stage for Emma's leadership. Investors and partners circulated the room, their conversations laced with praise for Vanguard's recent breakthroughs in artificial intelligence. Vanguard MCs partnered with people like Tesla house musician to arrange a whole lunch event. Emma moved among them with the ease of a seasoned diplomat, her tailored gown a bold statement of her confidence. She was midway through a conversation with a key investor when she spotted Matthew. He stood by the bar, his dark suit perfectly tailored, his smile easy and charming. But it wasn't his smile that caught Emma's attention. It was the way Lauren Bennett, Vanguard's chief operating officer, leaned in, slightly too close, as they spoke. "Oh, Ed, you talk to me a little bit about your training. You've been doing some work in space bombs for a few years?" Lauren had been Emma's most trusted confidant for years. Intelligent, composed, and fiercely loyal. Or so Emma had believed. Yet as Emma observed their interaction from across the room, unease prickled at the edges of her mind. The touch of Lauren's hand on Matthew's arm was fleeting but intimate. The smile Matthew gave her in return seemed warmer than necessary. Emma's analytical mind, honed over years of navigating the treacherous waters of corporate politics, began to connect dots she'd previously ignored. Matthew's recent late nights, which he attributed to the final edits on his new manuscript. Lauren's uncharacteristic evasiveness in meetings, coupled with vague mentions of family matters that prevented her from attending key strategy sessions. You do understand some of this, a year or so ago. I mean, I'm basically joining all the hermits. Whispers among Vanguard employees, subtle but persistent, about the COO's increasingly secretive behavior. That Emma had built her career by trusting her instincts, and those instincts now screamed that something was amiss. She excused herself from the conversation with a practiced smile and approached Matthew and Lauren. Her husband greeted her warmly, kissing her cheek, while Lauren's smile froze for the briefest of moments before recovering. "Emma, you've outdone yourself tonight," Lauren said, her voice smooth but lacking its usual warmth. "The turnout is phenomenal." No, it's this," began Mike. Well turned out, Mike. "Thank you, Lauren," Emma replied, her tone light but her gaze steady. "And thank you for keeping Matthew entertained. I was worried he might feel out of place in a room full of tech enthusiasts." She smiled. "Oh, Matthew's been delightful company," Lauren said, her eyes flicking briefly to him before settling back on Emma. "We've been discussing his latest novel. It sounds absolutely riveting." Emma's smile never wavered, but her mind raced. She had supported Matthew through every step of his literary career, attending countless book launches and readings. He had never needed anyone else to champion his work, least of all, her COO. Yet without her, Matthew was incapable of speaking. Without her, many of my friends in high school and even high school wouldn't have graduated college. Emma was a handsome woman who was slightly older than Emma. Well, I'd love to hear all about it later, Emma said, her voice as cool and polished as ever. But for now, I believe there's someone from Nexus Corp who's been dying to meet you, Lauren. Lauren is like, what? What did you do? Lauren hesitated but couldn't refuse. As she disappeared into the crowd, Emma turned to Matthew. Enjoying yourself? She asked, her tone neutral. Yeah, of course, he said, his smile disarming. It's always fascinating to see you in your element, but something in his demeanor struck Emma as calculated. Was it guilt? Or was she imagining things? The night wore on, the gala unfolding like a meticulously choreographed play. Emma moved through the crowd with grace, but her thoughts remained on Lauren and Matthew. The whispers she'd overheard in the hallways of Vanguard came rushing back, their significance impossible to ignore now. Lauren and Matthew were both at the heart of her world, one professional, one personal. If they were colluding, the implications would be devastating. By the end of the evening, Emma's mind was set. She wouldn't act on impulse, nor would she confront them without irrefutable evidence. The stakes were far too high. Whatever they were hiding, she would uncover it, and she would make them regret thinking they could deceive her. Now, the gala's glamour faded quickly for Emma Caldwell as she sat in her sleek office late into the night, staring at the envelope the investigator had delivered earlier. A part of her hesitated to open it, fearing what lay inside. Yet the steely resolve that had propelled her to the top of Vanguard Industries refused to let her falter. Slowly, deliberately, she slid her finger under the envelope's seal and pulled out its contents. Finally, it read aloud. The photographs came first, a sequence of candid, grainy images taken from across a street, through the windows of a boutique hotel. The first showed Matthew entering the building alone, his familiar gait unmistakable. The next image froze Lauren Bennett in the act of stepping into the same hotel. The timestamp confirmed it was no coincidence. The investigators' report detailed the dates and times of their meetings, aligning them with nights Matthew had claimed to be at literary events or working late at the library. Lauren had been similarly unaccounted for, her absences from Vanguard justified with vague excuses. What Emma read next chilled her to the core. The investigator hadn't only uncovered an affair, he had stumbled upon something far more insidious. Lauren had been siphoning proprietary data from Vanguard, information vital to upcoming launches and strategic plans. But she wasn't acting alone. Matthew, through his proximity to Emma, had facilitated access to emails and sensitive documents. Their target was Nexus Corp, Vanguard's fiercest competitor, a company perpetually on the verge of outmaneuvering them. Oh, when he told Vanguard, he thought of something urgent. Vanguard said. The report concluded that Lauren had been feeding the stolen information to Nexus in exchange for financial compensation and a promised executive role. And so now their moms claim that they did something to legally purchase a portion of their son's loan. Emma's breath caught. Betrayal on this level wasn't just a personal affront. It was a threat to everything she had built, the woman she had mentored and trusted for years, and the man she had chosen to share her life with, had colluded to sabotage her empire. But Emma wasn't the type to crumble under betrayal. She leaned back in her chair, the cold rage in her chest hardening into a weapon. No confrontation yet. She needed to understand the full scope of their duplicity before making her move. Emotional outbursts were for amateurs. She was a strategist, and this would be her greatest battle. In the weeks that followed, Emma operated with precision and subtlety. She started by quietly reviewing every corner of her company. Access logs, financial records, project schedules, anything that could reveal Lauren's trail. It didn't take long to find discrepancies that aligned with the investigator's report. Funds had been funneled into a shell company, one with ties to Nexus Corp. Small inconsistencies in contracts, deliberate, Emma now realized, had left Vanguard vulnerable to competitive underbids. And Lauren had played her role masterfully, disguising sabotage as mistakes. But now that Emma knew where to look, the signs were unmistakable. She even discovered that Lauren had recruited Eric, Vanguard's CFO, to cover for her financial diversions. Emma didn't stop there. She turned her attention to Matthew's involvement, digging into his personal devices and communications. Through a secure backdoor program installed on his laptop, one that he didn't know existed, Emma accessed his emails. What she found sickened her. The love letters to Lauren were bad enough, their tone alternating between guilt and passion. But worse were the business emails. They revealed Matthew's role in translating Emma's technical jargon into something Nexus's team could weaponize. He had forwarded classified materials and discussed Nexus's potential acquisition of certain Vanguard assets Lauren had worked to weaken. And her marriage wasn't just a sham, it had been weaponized against her. Aquila said, still, Emma played her part in their domestic life flawlessly. She didn't let on that anything had changed. She kissed Matthew goodnight, shared polite banter over coffee, and even entertained his small anecdotes about work frustrations. She knew every word out of his mouth was a lie, but Emma's patience had always been one of her greatest strengths. Each passing day allowed her to refine her strategy. Yeah, thank you, Mr. Emma laughed at the last part. Meanwhile, Emma enlisted the help of her most trusted ally, Marissa Cohen, Vanguard's general counsel. Marissa, a no-nonsense attorney with a reputation for ruthlessness, was the one person Emma knew wouldn't falter under pressure. Karsten won to get you as ready as possible, Emma replied. Emma handed over the investigator's report, along with her own findings. Marissa read through everything in silence, her expression darkening with each page. This is bad, Marissa finally said, setting the papers down. But we can use it. If we act carefully, we can neutralize the threat without alerting Nexus. The timing will be critical, Emma nodded. I want airtight evidence before we go public with anything. Nexus won't just drop Lauren when they find out. They'll deny everything and try to spin this as our failure, Marissa smirked. That's why we'll strike first. If we play this right, Nexus will be so busy cleaning up their mess, they won't have time to recover. Together, they mapped out a plan. The first step was surveillance. Marissa arranged for discreet monitoring of Lauren's and Eric's communications, as well as Matthew's movements. Emma ensured that all sensitive data at Vanguard was rerouted through secure systems that Lauren no longer had access to. This had to be done quietly, without raising suspicion. I'm bitten by the bug. I'm watching my startup fail. We're so afraid of what might happen if I stop being suspended. The second step was isolating the conspirators. Emma began delegating key responsibilities to other executives, sidelining Lauren under the guise of allowing her to focus on a special project. Eric, too, found himself with fewer opportunities to meddle as Emma's legal and accounting teams implemented stricter oversight. Privately, Emma prepared for the inevitable confrontation with Matthew. The man she had once adored now felt like a stranger. She didn't let herself dwell on the heartbreak. It was a luxury she couldn't afford. Instead, she focused on dismantling his escape routes. She contacted Vanguard's IT team under the pretense of conducting a security audit, ensuring every account linked to Matthew was tracked. I, I don't. His attempts to cover his tracks, she noticed, had already begun. As the weeks passed, Emma's resolve only grew stronger. The evidence piled up, painting a damning picture of Matthew and Lauren's betrayal. Each time Matthew smiled at her, oblivious to the storm gathering behind her calm exterior, Emma felt the sting of his deceit, but she channeled that pain into determination. She would not let him see her break. She thought, no, wait, I've been thinking, what if her final move came in the form of an invitation? A private anniversary party at their home. Only close friends, family, and senior Vanguard executives were invited, including Lauren and Eric. The date was carefully chosen. It aligned with Nexus's next board meeting, where they planned to finalize their acquisition strategy. Emma had already leaked just enough information to Nexus's board to ensure their confidence in Lauren. But what they didn't know was that the party would be the beginning of their downfall. Emma's plan was nearly complete, and she was ready to make her move. As the date approached, Emma reflected on everything she had uncovered. Betrayal was never simple. It was messy, layered, and deeply personal. But she had learned to separate her emotions from the task at hand. When the time came to reveal the truth, she would be ready. Emma's preparations became the quiet hum of a well-oiled machine, each detail carefully orchestrated to ensure her plan's success. Her days were spent navigating Vanguard's complex web of operations, ensuring the company stayed on track despite the impending upheaval. Her nights were consumed by meticulous strategy sessions with her legal and investigative teams. Every move Lauren and Matthew made was logged, analyzed, and, if necessary, preempted. Emma wasn't just planning to expose their betrayal. She was preparing to annihilate the foundation of their collusion. The morning before the anniversary party, Emma arrived at Vanguard early, her heels clicking sharply against the polished floors of the executive wing. She stopped by the office of Eric Walker, her CFO. Eric's door was ajar, and she could see him hunched over his desk, his face pale as he studied his computer screen. Emma's investigators had discovered that Eric, likely under pressure from Lauren, had falsified several financial reports to obscure the shell company transfers. His complicity would be a key part of her legal case. Eric, she said, her voice calm but firm. He jumped, startled, and quickly minimized his screen. I need to see you in the conference room in 10 minutes. Bring the revised financial reports. He nodded, avoiding her gaze. Of course, Emma. As she walked away, she couldn't help but feel a pang of regret. Eric had been with Vanguard for nearly a decade, and she had once considered him a loyal ally. But loyalty meant nothing when weighed against greed, and Eric had chosen his side. Tomorrow, he would face the consequences of that decision. Meanwhile, Lauren Bennett was in her office, unaware of the storm gathering around her. She was reviewing the final details of her exit strategy, which included a quiet resignation letter she planned to submit after the anniversary party. By then, her deal with Nexus Corp would be finalized, and she would have a new position as Vice President of Strategy. She had already arranged for her first payment from Nexus to be deposited into an offshore account, ensuring her financial security in case things went awry. Lauren had underestimated Emma's resilience. She believed Emma was too focused on running Vanguard to notice the cracks forming beneath the surface. The irony was that Lauren's success at undermining Vanguard had been possible only because Emma had trusted her completely. That trust, Lauren thought smugly, had been her most effective weapon. Emma's plan was reaching its crescendo. She had orchestrated every detail of the upcoming party with precision, from the guest list to the menu. The guest list particularly had been carefully curated to include key figures who would bear witness to the revelations. Nexus executives, several Vanguard board members, and even some of Emma's competitors had been invited under the guise of celebrating her marriage. It would be a gathering of the powerful and influential, a perfect stage for what was to come. The party was set to take place at Emma and Matthew's sprawling home, a modern architectural marvel perched on a hill overlooking the city. The home, with its glass walls and open spaces, symbolized transparency and success, a sharp contrast to the secrets it had unknowingly harbored. That evening, Emma met with Marissa Cohen to finalize the plan. They sat in Emma's private study, poring over the evidence that would be presented. Marissa had already coordinated with law enforcement and regulatory bodies, ensuring that by the time Emma made her move, Lauren and Eric would face immediate consequences. Matthew, too, would not escape unscathed, though his punishment would be personal rather than legal. "Are you sure you want to do this at the party?" Marissa asked, her brow furrowed. "It's going to be messy." "Messy is fine," Emma replied, her tone steely. "This isn't just about exposing them. It's about making a statement. They tried to undermine me, and I want everyone to see what happens when someone tries to take me down." Marissa nodded, a hint of admiration in her eyes. "Then we're ready. Everything's in place." The morning of the anniversary party arrived, and Emma awoke early, her mind sharp and focused. Matthew, unaware of what the day held, greeted her with a kiss and a smile. He looked relaxed, even cheerful, as he talked about the surprise he had planned for their guests, a speech honoring Emma's accomplishments. The irony of his words was almost too much to bear, but Emma played her part flawlessly, thanking him and pretending to be touched. There's a new bill in the mailbox," Matthew began, clearing his throat. As the day progressed, the house buzzed with activity. Caterers, decorators, and staff moved about, transforming the space into an elegant setting for the evening's event. Emma watched the preparations with a calm exterior, though inside, her anticipation grew. Every detail had to be perfect. She retreated to her office for a final review of the slideshow she had prepared. It began innocuously enough. Photos of her and Matthew over the years, snapshots of happy moments at Vanguard. But halfway through, the tone shifted. Images of Lauren and Matthew entering the boutique hotel, spreadsheets exposing the financial discrepancies, and screenshots of incriminating emails filled the screen. The final slide was a simple statement: "Betrayal is remembered." Emma saved the file and leaned back in her chair, allowing herself a brief moment of satisfaction. The pieces were all in place. Now it was only a matter of execution. As evening fell, guests began to arrive. The house quickly filled with a who's who of the business world, their laughter and chatter creating a lively atmosphere. Emma moved through the crowd with practiced ease, greeting guests and making small talk. Matthew stayed close to her side, playing the role of the devoted husband. Lauren, too, was present, her confidence radiating as she mingled with guests. Tono was my first, but Lawrence got mine, coming in second. Eric hovered near the bar, looking increasingly uneasy. At precisely 8 p.m., Emma called for everyone's attention. She stood at the head of the room, a glass of champagne in hand. Matthew and Lauren flanked her, their expressions expectant. "Thank you all for coming tonight," Emma began, her voice steady and composed. "This evening is about celebrating milestones, both personal and professional. But it's also about truth." As she spoke, the room fell silent, the guests hanging on her every word. She nodded to the AV technician who started the slideshow. The first few slides drew murmurs of appreciation, but as the incriminating images began to appear, the room erupted into gasps and whispers. "Titanic is the last movie anyone hurt my parents have me watching, and beyond, ever again." Lauren's face turned ashen as the photos of her and Matthew appeared on screen. Matthew stammered, his charm crumbling as he tried to explain. "Emma, this isn't—" "Save it," Emma interrupted, her voice like ice. "The evidence speaks for itself." The final slides laid out Lauren's dealings with Nexus, Eric's complicity, and the broader conspiracy against Vanguard. As the last slide appeared, Emma turned to her audience. "Let this be a reminder to anyone who thinks betrayal can go unchecked. Actions have consequences." Before the stunned crowd could react further, law enforcement officials entered the room, escorted by Marissa. Lauren and Eric were led away, their protest drowned out by the murmurs of the crowd. Matthew, too, was left exposed, his reputation in shambles. Emma watched as her empire and her life began its transformation. The storm she had unleashed was just beginning, but she stood unshaken, ready for what came next. Excellent first segment. The house was silent in the early evening twilight, the calm before the storm. Emma stood in her bedroom, gazing out at the city lights twinkling in the distance. A glass of wine sat untouched on the dresser behind her. Tonight, the culmination of her meticulous plan would unfold. Her thoughts swirled between anticipation and dread. She felt no triumph, only the weight of what was to come. And, the issue was that my father signed up for Alcoholics Anonymous meetings, was my willing participation to help my family. Without that, a lot of the stuff that I like to do, I would have to experiment with drugs and wouldn't feel like I did. The guests began arriving at 7 sharp, their luxury cars pulling into the long driveway of Emma and Matthew's modernist home. The valet service worked seamlessly, and the entryway filled with the buzz of conversation. Emma moved among the arriving guests with a composed smile, dressed in a sleek black gown that commanded attention without seeming ostentatious. Every detail of the evening was calculated, even her wardrobe, a subtle reminder of her authority and control. The Vanguard board members were the first to arrive, shaking her hand and congratulating her on the company's recent successes. Her competitors followed, exchanging polite banter as they surveyed the house. Nexus Corp executives came as well, their smiles charming, but laced with the sharpness of business rivalry. Lauren Bennett arrived shortly after, her hand brushing Matthew's arm as she walked in. Emma's eyes flickered at the gesture, but otherwise betrayed nothing. The final arrivals included Eric Walker, the increasingly jittery CFO, and several prominent attorneys and regulators Emma had strategically invited to witness what was about to unfold. At 8 o'clock, Emma stepped to the center of the room, her commanding presence enough to silence the hum of conversation. She raised her glass of champagne, her voice cutting through the room. "Ladies and gentlemen," she began, her tone warm yet authoritative, "thank you for being here tonight to celebrate not only my marriage to Matthew, but also the accomplishments of Vanguard Industries. It's been a journey of perseverance, trust, and collaboration, a reflection of what makes this company and my life so fulfilling." In my opinion, whatever. Lisa, wow, amazing. She is fabulous. This lady is such a powerful mind. Let me ask you. She paused, allowing the weight of her words to settle. Matthew smiled beside her, clearly oblivious, and Lauren clinked her glass lightly against his. Emma's gaze lingered on them for a moment, before continuing. "I want to take a moment to acknowledge the individuals who've contributed to this success," she said, gesturing subtly toward Lauren and Eric. "Leadership is never a solo act. It's built on the support of trusted colleagues." Lauren gave a slight nod, a self-satisfied smile tugging at her lips, while Eric shifted uncomfortably. And trust," Emma continued, her voice hardening just slightly, "is the foundation of every relationship, whether personal or professional." A murmur rippled through the crowd, sensing the shift in tone. Emma nodded to the AV technician, who dimmed the lights. The large screen behind her came alive, displaying an elegant slideshow of her and Matthew's life together. It began with charming, sepia-toned photos of their early days, vacations, holidays, Vanguard's launch. The room cooed and smiled, their admiration palpable. But then the images changed. The screen displayed photos of Matthew and Lauren entering a boutique hotel, their faces unmistakable despite the blurry street photography. Gasps erupted from the crowd. "All I wanted to do was get away, but I'd never let Lauren down." "What is this?" Matthew muttered, his smile faltering. Emma didn't look at him. Her gaze was fixed on the crowd as the images continued. Screenshots of encrypted email exchanges between Lauren and Nexus executives followed, detailing stolen data and proprietary information. A spreadsheet exposed the financial discrepancies tied to shell companies. A final slide outlined Eric's role in the siphoning of funds. What? By now the room was filled with murmurs, shock, and a smattering of outright outrage. Emma raised her hand, calling for silence. "This is what happens when trust is betrayed," she said, her voice sharp and cutting. "When those closest to you, those you rely on, turn their loyalty into a weapon." Lauren stood frozen, her face drained of color. "Emma, this isn't—" "Don't," Emma interrupted, her gaze cold. "Spare us the excuses. The evidence speaks for itself." Matthew reached for her arm. "Emma, please, let me explain." She turned to him, her voice laced with icy finality. "Explain what? How you sold out your wife, your marriage, and your principles to help someone else sabotage me? Go ahead, Matthew. I'm curious." He opened his mouth to speak, but no words came. His polished charm had evaporated under the weight of the room's collective judgment. Eric, standing near the bar, appeared as though he might faint. He tried to sidle toward the door, but two security guards stepped into his path. Lauren, meanwhile, looked around desperately for an ally. There were none. Okay. So, I thought it was important that you see this until people we're doing something. Eric, tell me about this." Emma wasn't finished. "Let me make one thing clear," she said, turning back to the crowd. "I built Vanguard with integrity. I won't allow it to be tarnished by treachery." Emma waited for responses, but instead she went into the crowd, her eyes darkening as she stared at several things. As she spoke, law enforcement officers entered the room. They headed straight for Lauren and Eric, their presence causing a ripple of gasps among the guests. Marissa Cohen, Emma's legal counsel, followed close behind. "Sorry, sir." Lauren Bennett and Eric Walker," Marissa said, her voice calm but firm. "You're being taken into custody for financial fraud, corporate espionage, and embezzlement." Lauren tried to protest, her voice rising in panic, but the officers were already securing her wrists with handcuffs. Eric muttered something unintelligible as he was led away, his head hanging low. The room watched in stunned silence. Emma's composure never wavered. "As for you," she said, turning to Matthew, "your betrayal is of a different kind, and I'll deal with you in private." The crowd murmured again, unsure what that meant. Emma gave them no time to speculate. "Thank you all for coming," she said, her tone brisk now. "You've witnessed what it means to safeguard integrity and to hold people accountable. Vanguard will emerge stronger from this." She didn't wait for applause or congratulations. Instead, she walked away, leaving the stunned guests to process the wreckage of the evening. Her mission was complete. And it was actually with a great deal of self-consciousness that, after everyone's chatted, but already, later that night, Emma sat alone in her study, the house finally quiet. She had faced the storm and emerged victorious, but the victory felt hollow. She stared at the divorce papers sitting on her desk, her pen hovering over the signature line. "Huh?" Matthew knocked on the door, stepping in hesitantly. His face was pale, his shoulders hunched in defeat. "Emma, don't," she said, cutting him off. "There's nothing to say." He hesitated, then nodded, his head bowing in resignation. As he turned to leave, Emma spoke one last time. "You didn't just betray me, Matthew. You betrayed the woman who believed in you, who fought for you, who built a life with you. And you didn't just betray Vanguard. You betrayed yourself." Hope he comes through. He left without another word. Emma finally signed the papers, the pen gliding smoothly across the page. She felt no sadness, only a grim sense of closure. She set the papers aside and leaned back in her chair, staring out at the city skyline. For the first time in weeks, she allowed herself a deep breath. Her fight wasn't over. There would be fallout, lawsuits, media scrutiny. But she was ready. Whatever came next, Emma Caldwell would meet it head-on. She had proven that she was unbreakable. The day after the party dawned crisp and clear, the kind of day Emma Caldwell might have savored under different circumstances. She stood in her home office, gazing at the remnants of the previous night's spectacle, the half-empty champagne flutes on the terrace, the wilted floral arrangements, and the silence that hung heavy in the air. The room was still charged with the echoes of shock and betrayal. But for Emma, the night's events were only the beginning. She placed her hands on her desk, where a meticulously organized set of documents awaited her attention. These papers weren't just legal formalities, they were weapons. Divorce papers for Matthew, finalized agreements for new executive appointments to replace Lauren and Eric, and a press release addressing Vanguard's handling of the recent internal breach. Emma had no intention of letting the world see her as a victim, and she had no intention of letting the world see her as a victim. Instead, she would present herself as a leader who acted decisively, salvaging her company's integrity and strength. Her phone buzzed. Marissa Cohen, her general counsel, was on the line. "They've both been processed," Marissa said. "Lauren's already lawyered up, but her prospects don't look good. The fraud and espionage charges are airtight. Eric is cooperating. He's throwing Lauren under the bus, in the hopes of a lighter sentence." "Marissa, I used 2 of Lauren's sentences, with one specific point," Emma smirked. She had anticipated as much. "Good. Ensure Eric knows that the only way to avoid complete ruin is full transparency. I want every detail of their dealings with Nexus Corp. We're going to turn this into a masterclass on corporate accountability." "And Matthew?" Marissa asked cautiously. Emma's smirk faded. Matthew's betrayal was personal, and she was still grappling with how to reconcile the man she had loved with the man who had sold her out. "Leave Matthew to me," she said, her tone clipped. "He's no longer Vanguard's problem. Call what this is?" She looked up, her eyes dry. "You detect hidden emotion." By mid-morning, Emma's team had mobilized. Press inquiries flooded Vanguard's headquarters, but her PR staff followed her lead with surgical precision. A statement went live at noon, a brief but powerful message that addressed the breach without revealing specifics, emphasized Vanguard's commitment to transparency, and confirmed that internal measures were already being taken to prevent future vulnerabilities. Okay, so I got to get to that. The message framed Emma as a proactive and unflinching leader, a narrative she intended to dominate the headlines. Simultaneously, Emma convened an emergency board meeting. The same board members who had been present at the party now sat around the table, their expressions a mix of unease and respect. Emma wasted no time. "Lauren Bennett and Eric Walker exploited their positions to undermine this company," she began, her voice steady but forceful. "As of this morning, both are in custody, and Vanguard is cooperating fully with authorities to ensure justice is served. But let me be clear, this betrayal does not define us. It defines them." She let the words settle before continuing. "Our focus now is on restoring trust and securing Vanguard's future. I've already initiated an internal audit, and I've appointed a team of external advisors to oversee the transition. We will emerge from this stronger." "Ask Patrick," she said before rising from her desk. She met the gaze of Claire, asked her name. I held my hand out. The board members nodded, visibly reassured by her confidence. One of them, an older man named Gerald Carter, spoke up. "Emma, your leadership through this crisis has been extraordinary. We're behind you." She inclined her head, acknowledging his support without basking in it. This was not a victory lap. It was the opening move of a long game. She said, "I didn't send the video. I had intentionally deleted the photos and the list." Later that afternoon, Emma turned her attention to Matthew. He had spent the morning in their guest room, avoiding her, no doubt reeling from the public exposure of his affair and his complicity in Lauren's scheme. Emma's confrontation with him, however, was not fueled by anger, but by calculated intent. She found him sitting on the edge of the bed, his head in his hands. He looked up as she entered, his face a mixture of shame and desperation. "Emma," he began, his voice trembling, "I don't know what to say. I, I didn't mean for it to go this far." Frederick sighed. She crossed her arms, her gaze icy. "You didn't mean for what to go this far? Betraying our marriage, undermining my company, or exposing yourself as a liar and a coward?" He flinched but said nothing. "I trusted you," she continued, her voice rising slightly. "I shared my life with you, my dreams, and you turned around and handed that trust to Lauren Bennett. Why? For what?" "I felt invisible, Emma," he finally admitted, his words spilling out in a rush. "You're larger than life. You've accomplished so much. I couldn't measure up. Lauren made me feel seen." Emma's lips curled into a bitter smile. "Seen? So your solution was to tear me down, to sabotage everything I've worked for because your ego couldn't handle my success? I didn't think it would hurt you like this," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. Emma laughed, a cold, humorless sound. "Of course you didn't, because men like you never think beyond your own needs." She stepped closer, holding out a thick envelope. "These are the divorce papers. My lawyers have ensured that you'll walk away with what you came into this marriage with. Nothing. The only thing I'm leaving you is your name. Sign them and get out of my house." Matthew's eyes filled with tears. "Emma, please. I still love you." Her expression softened for a brief moment, but then her resolve returned. "Love doesn't survive betrayal, Matthew. You killed it the moment you chose Lauren over me. Goodbye." He took the envelope, his hands shaking, and Emma turned and walked out without another word. Over the following weeks, Emma worked tirelessly to rebuild what had been damaged. Nexus Corp's involvement in the scheme became public knowledge, thanks to the evidence provided by Eric. The revelation was a PR disaster for Nexus, and its CEO resigned amid the scandal. Vanguard's stock, which had dipped briefly, rebounded stronger than ever, as investors rebounded stronger than ever. Embarrassingly, her firm tabloid claimed that her ambassadors were providing some of the best handling of the crisis. Lauren and Eric faced legal consequences, with the former receiving a prison sentence for corporate espionage. Matthew's literary career was effectively over after an exposé detailed his role in the affair and the corporate sabotage. Publishers blacklisted him, and his name became synonymous with betrayal. Masseltomer or Scott Paris is doing this. Emma, however, was determined not to let the scandal define her. She launched a new initiative at Vanguard, focusing on ethical leadership and transparency in the tech industry. The program gained widespread acclaim, cementing her reputation as a visionary leader who turned adversity into opportunity. Months later, Emma stood in her office, gazing out at the skyline. The city stretched before her, a testament to resilience and ambition. Her assistant entered with a small envelope. "It was left at the front desk," the assistant said, handing it over. Emma opened it carefully. The note inside was brief and unsigned. "Not everyone stays down. Watch your back." Parentheses, and some names and telephone numbers. "Never escape death call." Faint smile played on her lips as she folded the note and set it aside. If there was one thing Emma Caldwell had learned, it was that threats were inevitable for people who dared to lead. She would meet them head-on, just as she always had. Ah! Oh my God, I forgot actually. Yeah, after you, I mean, I'm sorry. I fell asleep again. As the sun dipped below the horizon, casting the city in hues of gold and amber, Emma felt an unfamiliar emotion stirring within her. Hope. Betrayal had left its scars, but it had also forged her into something stronger. She was unbreakable, and the world would never forget it.